Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Unvarnished Football. I'm Michael Jackson of the Game Before the Money. With me, as always, former NFL executive and World Football League owner Upton Bell. The draft starts today. It's Thursday, April 21st, 2026. Upton, what do you see going into this year's NFL draft? Everybody, knows Mendoza will go number one. I see David Bailey as the semi-consensus pick at number two. What do you see going into this draft?
First of all, Michael, ESPN has been announcing breathlessly, like we're waiting for the smoke, the white smoke to come out to announce the Pope. They are counting down every second with wall-to-wall coverage of when the draft starts, which is at 8 o'clock. I can tell you this, while perusing the names and stuff outside of Mendoza, this is the Who draft. And I don't mean the rock group. The Who draft is when many of the prospects are not very good, although you can always be surprised with what could happen. But the way I see it is, most of the people would be happy to avoid the first round and not have to pay the money. And that's the way I see it. I don't really see. And by the way, Mendoza, who I like very much, many of the pro scouts and people I talk to don't think he's the can't miss great, whether it's John Elway or Dan Marino or somebody like that. Most people don't think he's the greatest. Of course, they didn't think that about Brady also, and that's why he went so late in the draft. But I want to remind our audience that it is still, from the very beginning to today, the great American crapshoot. The draft might be described this time around as not very good, but you never know. And that's the reason that people tune in and watch it, and why it's the second or third most popular TV show of the NFL of now of all time. So what has happened is that most of the experts, and I've checked with them, read their stories and everything else like that, don't think very much of this draft, that this is really a down year, and particularly for quarterbacks. And the quarterbacks are always the glamour boys of the drafts. And really, outside of Mendoza, again, who do you have next? The quarterback from Alabama? Many people question that. The quarterback from Miami? Many people question that too. So I would say, other than the show business part of it, it's a blah draft.
And I'm not sure if maybe there are any superstars in this draft, but I don't know because I define the draft maybe a little bit differently than some. A lot of people are like, well, we've got a first round draft pick, we got the first overall pick, we got a high first round pick. Our team needs to get a superstar with that pick. And and I think my definition of a successful first round pick is if you get a guy who starts for you for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, that's a pretty good pick. You get a second round pick who does that, that's a pretty good pick. So I'm not necessarily thinking of superstars as a successful draft. I'm thinking of players who are effective, who are quality, who can contribute. And I think there might be more players like that in this draft, especially at the receiver, offensive line, and defensive line, and maybe even linebacker. Maybe not superstars, but guys who are going to be solid starters for a while.
Well, that all may be true, but in today's NFL, with everybody having their own taxi squad, as once named by Paul Brown and Mickey McBride of the Cleveland Browns, what basically is happening now is that there are so many people out there. I mean, when you look at rosters, Michael, of teams, particularly by the middle of the season, uh, there are guys moving off and on the taxi squad, as I call it, and I mean, there's some players that play for like 7 or 8 teams. So if I the way I looked at it when I was drafting, now that was years ago, is if that player couldn't come in and start, or at least start by the second year, you've wasted your pick. And if you look at it now today, uh, there are 32 teams. Then there were 14 and then 16 teams. So there were like 16 less teams. Now you could say this about the draft, that basically, if you can get somebody to come in and start, that doesn't mean that they're very good. That just means they're going to start. So if you look maybe at the first 10 to 12 picks, maybe a few more, if you can't find somebody that is really going to come in and start for you and be a really good football player, I think I won't say you wasted your pick, but I just don't see it. And maybe I see it differently because I'm looking at it through the eyes of a scout and a personnel director and a former general manager. And applying it to today, I've said to you many times before, I have 3 sets. One set on Sunday is on the red zone, which shows all the teams. And I can tell you, there's so many bad football teams around. I don't care what they say. They're in the race because, like all sports, everybody's in the race today. You know, I mean, particularly in the NBA. Now we have play-in games. How soon would the NFL be into? Okay, you have a very good record. I I know you're 2-24, but you know what? You deserve a play-in game. So again, back to your point, where I somewhat disagree is if I if I can't get somebody to come in here, for instance, Will Campbell, who the Patriots drafted on the first round last year, he came in, he had a so-so year, he almost got the quarterback Drake May killed a couple of times, particularly in the Super Bowl. Do I consider that um, a guy that started all year long? Do I consider that a good draft pick? I wouldn't, because I'll tell you what's going to happen here. Now, the Patriots pick second to last. They picked number 31. But they're now saying that they're going to be looking for more offensive linemen, which really means, hey, fellas, we're not really sure about this guy. This is I'm interpreting. We're
Yeah.
not really sure about this guy. We think he's going to be okay, but we still need more people. That's the cover that you have for it. So in my case, I'm looking for somebody, particularly if I'm drafting up to numbers, let's say number 16, half of the 32. I want a starter, and I want a starter that's going to be around and be really good for 5 or 6 years till they get hurt or whatever happens. I don't see that this time around. Again, there are always surprises. I'll give you my example of a surprise. Preston Pearson, I think I took him on the 16th or 17th round. That's when they had 20 rounds of picks. Today, today you might as well call the draft over about the fourth round. But I looked at him as a basketball player. Never played football. I went to his practices, watched his footwork, said this is a guy who's better than some of the players we're drafting, and drafted him then. And he turned out to play as both a defensive back and a running back on 4 Super Bowls. So did I know what I was doing? I was guessing, but I knew that I saw a terrific athlete, and I thought he was willing to hit people, which he was. So in that case, it worked out for me. in all of my drafts at the Colts and the early ones at the Patriots before I got fired with Buck O'Croy I brought in, I can tell you that if you look at my drafts, then you will see very few mistakes. And again, carrying on the whole thing. You know why? Because I didn't have 55,000 pro days. I didn't have everybody be able to be invited to come to Indianapolis and watch everybody work out. I didn't have other days that I could bring them in. It's just gotten ridiculous. Either he's a player or he is not. And if you have gone to spring practice, gone to the fall games, I got the videos, done any of the testing, if you can't make up your mind on a player with that type of work, then you're just kidding yourself.
Well,
And it goes
yeah, yeah,
on and on and on, Michael.
yeah, and as you say, over analysis equals paralysis. I work in the music industry, and it's like when you're hiring somebody for a gig playing an instrument, you know, a lot of times you even get people just based on recommendations. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, hire this guy. And if you are going to have auditions, if you get auditions, you know, you don't audition somebody 4, 5, 6 times for the gig. You give them you hire you do it after one audition, and generally, if the guy is going to make it into the group, on within the first 15, 20 minutes usually. And in sports, especially football, they just drag it out, and probably to, as you pointed out, to the detriment um, of everything. Now, I'd like to kind of shift a little bit and talk about some teams. We talk about this draft maybe not being as hyped as other drafts. So you got some other teams. You got they're trading away their first round picks, and in fact, the Packers did it last year, and essentially, they got Micah Parsons in the first round. The Bengals just traded with the Giants the 10th overall pick for Dexter Lawrence, so they basically got Dexter Lawrence in the first round. The Ravens basically getting Trey Hendrickson in the first round by giving up their first round pick. What do you think of deals like that? And are some years better than others? Is this a good year to do something like that? What do you think?
Well, yeah, they know that they know those teams, the Giants and Cincinnati know that they are that the draft isn't particularly good, and that's what they're really saying. And we want somebody that we know is already good. I think Cincinnati steal of the Giants player is really good because he's a jerk, but I really like him. I mean, he can play, and basically the Giants had a really good defense last year. They just had no offense, and they had a lot of other problems. But teams that make deals before the draft and give up their first choice. Micah Parsons was a really great move by the Packers until he got hurt, and that's the other part of it. You in today's game, where injuries happen all the time because of the size, speed, and all of the other great abilities that the modern player has, you're more liable because of the speed of the game to get injuries to great players like Parsons and other players because of the game itself now. It's more dangerous in many ways, even though it isn't as tough as it was back in the 60s, let's say all the way through the 2000s, the early 2000s. So what you're really saying is when you make a deal like that and give up your first choice, you're either saying This is a can't miss guy. He's already proved himself. Or you're saying that the draft stinks and I'd much rather have this than some first round choice that I'm guessing on. And I think you'll see other teams trade out of their picks as it gets later in the draft. Particularly, let's say after, let's say 16 or 17 in the first round. Let's see how many teams actually, kind of opt out of their pick.
Well, the Raiders still have Max Crosby, and I don't know if the Raiders are thinking of draft, because they wanted the first round picks uh, for Max Crosby before the failed trade. Um, the Giants have two picks in the top 10. Now with the Colts, you had the number one pick, and then you had the other first round pick. How do you go into the draft with that kind of draft capital?
Well, first and foremost, we gambled on the second first round pick because in taking Bubba Smith, Shula, I didn't completely agree on Bubba Smith. I wanted George Webster, who I thought was headed to the Hall of Fame till he got injured. Such a great player. Bubba, I knew Bubba was a con artist who basically, and I told Shula that, I said, I know it's a good gamble because, he was 6'7", he was 295 pounds. Even today, he would be pretty good size as a player. He just, when he felt like it, he could just run over people. He didn't even have to put any moves on. He was that good and that athletic. But also his downside, as I explained it to Don Shula, I said is he takes every 3 or 4 plays off, and he isn't a guy that is going to be a great practice player. So we took him. Shula got what he wanted. I was okay with it. So we gambled on the second pick because he was such a great runner at Michigan, Jim Detweiler, a big running back. He was 6'1", 6'2", and 225 pounds. Could run inside or run outside. But he had gotten a knee injury that year. And we looked at it, we had our doctors look at it and said, you know what? We've got our pick. We're going to gamble on this. And unfortunately, really looked great early in training camp. And then the knee kind of started to go. And that was the end of our second first round pick. So today, when you have two picks, I wouldn't gamble like we did then. Uh, and we could afford to because we had a pretty good running game. We had Tom Matty and Unitas was still great. We had a very good offensive line. So, and we were trying to build our defense back again. But if it was today, I never would have taken that gamble.
Now, Upton, can you kind of take us in to the draft room on on draft day? What is that first round like, and what happens when you're lower in the rounds and you have these uncertainties? How much do you know about what the other teams are going to do, and what goes on behind the scenes, kind of responding to who gets picked? And are there times when just pretty much anybody you wanted got taken off the board and you had to adjust, or were there times where you had a big surprise, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this guy's still available?
Well, first and foremost, unlike today, there are so many people today in the room, including the owner and the coach and the coaches and the PR people and all of these people run and 55,000 scouts and everybody running all over the place. To me, it can be mass confusion. And look at the whole scene. Then there was myself, my scouts, which we had two full-time scouts. A lot of people don't remember, but my first assistant was George Young, who ended up becoming the New York Giants general manager and had a Hall of Fame career. So I had George Young, myself, the coaches, Shula, and that was it. And we days leading up to the draft, I had prepared everything. And the other thing we did in those days, I don't know whether they do it today or not. I don't think they do on any regular basis. Shula insisted that the coaches, I went out every weekend. And in fact, I was out during the week too, studying film, watching the players in the game, and then studying the film afterwards. Shula insisted that all of his assistant coaches go out to a game. So I assigned a game to each and every one of the coaches to look at their particular positions. So if there was a player like Bob Grant of Wake Forest, who we end up drafting on either second or third round, I wanted Chuck Noll to see him. Uh, if there was a running back, I wanted McCafferty to go see him, one of our other coaches. If it was an offensive lineman, John Sandusky. If it was a defensive player on the line of scrimmage, Bill Owensberger. So we specifically insisted, Shula did, that our coaches went out, we all went out. And so when we came back and some of the early drafts, because we were still fighting with the AFC.
The AFL, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it ended up being the AFC.
Yeah, it did.
But because of that, the drafts were earlier, which in some cases were good. We were drafted in November because everybody was fighting and running around trying to sign players. But that was good because you know what? It didn't give you all of this extra time to keep re-examining your navel, uh, as I say, navel gazing. Then later on, it became January and February, which is still didn't give it as much time as you now have today. I mean, pretty soon it's going to be in June, so the NFL can carry it out and publicize it. And I don't blame them, but then you had not that much time to make decisions, and I found that in many cases you made good decisions. So going into that draft, whether we were on the road like in San Francisco, where I took over for the personnel director who had a heart attack just before the draft, I probably had the best draft I ever had because I stepped in. There was very little time. And who did I take? Mike Curtis, who belongs in the Hall of Fame in the first round. In the second round, Ralph Neely, who does belong in the Hall of Fame. We had to trade his rights to Dallas because he wouldn't sign with the Colts. Then we drafted Marty Schottenheimer and Al Atkinson. They were my first 4 or 5 picks.
Not bad. Not bad.
Not yeah, because I knew what I wanted. The coaches went along with it. I remember Shula saying to me, "Hey kid, good luck. Don't screw it up." Those his words to me. And so basically, all the drafts after that, there were very few mistakes that we had because everybody was together. It was a smaller group of people, of decision makers, and we knew exactly what we wanted in most cases. So
now how did you adjust, like let's say with the Bears or the Giants picking ahead of you, and either taking a player that you wanted or leaving a player on the board that you assumed would be gone by the time it got to your place? How are those decisions made? Do you take the best available player? Do you stick with your
yeah.
needs? How are those scenarios handled?
Well, number one, you always take the best available player unless there are exact needs that we needed. In the case of Bubba Smith, we needed a defensive end. We needed a pass rusher. In the case of, let's say, Mike Curtis, my first draft where I took over, we didn't need Mike Curtis. I sold Shula the idea because he was a running back, but also a linebacker at Duke. And what I said to Shula is, you can draft him as a running back if you want to. I said, but eventually he will be a linebacker. And the first year he actually did play a running back occasionally. He wasn't in there full time. And by the second year at training camp, he had been moved to linebacker, and the rest was an incredible career. So there are times when you do take a chance, but basically the other thing that we knew is, now remember, there were 14 to 16 teams. We already knew pretty much, with an occasional surprise, of who was going to take what in front of us or even behind us. So by the time that we got to draft, whether it was higher or lower, we already knew pretty much who the other teams were going to take. We had our own mock draft. And so, today you see mock drafts, everything. You would think it'd become a mockumentary with all the crap that goes on. But I could tell you who the Giants were going to take, or who the then called the Redskins were going to take. We knew exactly who was going to be taken by whom. Occasionally we would guess wrong, but it was pretty much rudimentary as far as what you were going to do. So there was less guessing then, less teams, and too many people, in the pie making decisions today, whereas then you knew exactly. It was Shula, myself, the assistant coaches, and George Young. That was it.
Now you talk about making decisions. Let's kind of shift into other decisions that are being made, and this is going to change the environment of the NFL draft as even more and more as the years advance, and that's you know paying college football players. College football players are making quite a bit of money now, and you and I were kind of entertaining the notion of how players used to battle to stay to be able to declare themselves eligible for the NFL draft at a younger and younger age when they were juniors, sophomores. Now they seem to be battling the NCAA to try to stay in longer to make some money, and now, and you had mentioned this at while we were talking before the show. Now we're going to get into situations where if you're a sixth, seventh round pick, are you going to be able to make more money staying another year in college? You kind of weigh those kinds of things. What do you see in that in those scenarios, Upton? How is that going to affect the draft moving forward?
Well, it will more and more and more. First of all, I hate the transfer portal. I mean, players already, by the time of their last game, are getting ready to jump ship if the college they're at doesn't do very well, and these guys are jumping all over the place. And we've seen that happen, and particularly with the quarterbacks. So the other part of it is, I'm all for college players and have been for a long time getting some type of money. But now the money is so good. I mean, you can make millions of dollars and not have to worry about going to the pros and getting cut. Because the minute that your team is not doing well, or the minute that you don't like the situation, you can jump in the transfer portal, and then basically you can go to another college and make more money. I mean, there are guys now, Michael, that are 25, 26 years old, that which is really like a short NFL career, that are making more money than if they were drafted and then went through with a team for 4 or 5 years, or got cut or got traded, and mostly get cut. So if I'm a player that's kind of a borderline player, I'm looking at it, I'm saying, well, let me see. I'm here at Michigan. I'm making 2 million a year. I'm going to make it for the next 2 or 3 years, and that's the end of it. Versus going to the NFL and maybe I get drafted in the sixth or seventh round, something like that, or fourth or fifth round. How much money am I going to get? Will I be cut by them? Uh, will uh, will I have an opportunity to really make a lot more money before my time is over? And remember, again, in 1946, the average player's life in the NFL was 3.5 years. It is still the same today in 2026. So if I'm looking at it and I'm fairly smart and I'm saying maybe I get 5 years, maybe I get that. And I'm now guaranteed for the next year or two, and I can jump to another thing. Let's say 1.6 to 2 million. Why am I going to take a chance in the NFL draft?
Yeah, and especially I'm thinking, if I'm a guy and I've made, let's say $3 million over my NFL career, I'm calling up, you know, an an investment advisor, and I'm gonna just retire. Period. I'm not talking just about from football. I'm just talking about I'm gonna retire at 26 years old. I mean, that's not a bad game plan. If you're able to do that, more power to you. I mean, NFL, nah, hey, I'm fine. I'm going to Italy for the next 6 months. Y'all have a good season, you know, and just you can live a life of luxury for the rest of your life without working another day in your life if you make smart decisions and and retire. You talk about that. I mean, that's like winning the lottery at a very young age.
Well, it is, and if you're smart enough too, they're see. I think the colleges have lost everything. I watch the games because I like watching the games, but I have no feeling. I never get involved emotionally with any of these schools. That left me years ago when this thing was first put in, and now it's just getting worse and more refined. When I see Miami playing Indiana, do I really care? No. I like to watch Mendoza, and it was a pretty good game to the end. But I'm not emotionally involved, and I think I gave you the example in the NCAA championship basketball, and I played basketball on a college level, and I've always loved it and loved the NCAA. But March Madness ain't March Madness. March Madness is now March money. Five, the five starting players on the Michigan team that won the NCAA championship, all five were portal transfers just that year. So am I going to get involved? Am I going to get involved emotionally about them? Not at all. And I should look at the same way as college football now. It's really the pro game on a allegedly college level. They're not getting an education. They are not going to class. How many of the Indiana players do you think really went to class? Maybe the quarterback, because I think he's pretty smart.
Yeah, I mean, there's no evidence one way or another that I know of, but I get what you're saying, and you know, and again, it, this is only year one of the changes in college football. Um, you know, I find it highly likely that the players will have a union at some point. Um, and, that's going to further change college football and, diminish what is already the NCAA's power to regulate the game in certain aspects. In fact, they're not even in charge of salary cap enforcement. That's a completely different group. So, um, college football is going to continue to evolve. There's going to be more and more money in it, and
It's
that
just
is going to
taking.
affect the draft because there are probably it used to be the joke, the Hugh McElhenney joke that we talked about before about Hugh
Took a pay cut.
McElhenney. Yeah, yeah. Hugh McElhenney taking a pay cut, Frankie Albert getting up in front of the locker room and say, "Hey, great game to Hugh McElhenney, you know, the only man who took a pay cut to play in the NFL." Um,
And
and
that was in the 50s.
that was in the
That was,
50s.
yeah, I
Yep,
mean,
yep. And
there's a,
yeah, so
what,
that's going to happen more and more, where players might be looking at a pay cut to play pro football.
well, and that's my point with the NFL. When you look at the draft, and you look at the draft this year, and what everybody is saying is a down year, and you're looking at it and you're saying, well, what am I really getting here? Um, well, my next choice could be a 26-year-old college player. Do I want somebody at 26 when really his football life is more than half over? So it's not good for the NFL. It's good for the college player. And again, if he doesn't want to be a real sucker and go to the NFL, he can have a. If he's smart, he can have a really good life. And I think these guys are learning that they kind of know themselves what their real ability is and what they think their chances are in the NFL. Whereas in the past, you're dying to get in the NFL. Oh, please just sign me. I know I'm your 30th free agent, but please just do it. They don't need to do that anymore. And so we'll see what the quality of the NFL player will be. Probably in the early rounds, still very good, maybe even better. But what about the late rounds? What about that great free agent? Will there be any Johnny Unitas from off the sandlots? Will there be any Tom Brady? If Tom Brady was playing today, as smart as he is, as far as taking care of Tom Brady and all his investments and everything, if he was at Michigan today and Michigan said, Tom, we're going to pay you $5-6 million a year, and he's taken by the Patriots, let's say in the seventh or eighth round or something like that today, what do you think a guy like Brady might do?
Well, the thing about Brady was Drew Henson was kind of, he was sharing time with Drew Henson, who was a
True.
tremendous athlete. And if if people listening don't remember Drew Henson ended up choosing Major League Baseball.
Played
Um,
with the Yankees, right? Wasn't
he
it the
went to the
Yankees?
Yankees organization.
Yeah.
Your friend John Sterling would probably be able to tell us quite a bit more about that. But yeah, so
But what if you're Brady, and Brady's always been a very calculating person, even when he was here. Everywhere he's gone, he's always calculating, and particularly the money. I mean, he's he's a multimillionaire now, and he's investing in every Tom, Dick, and Harry investment that he can find. Uh, uh, but if he looked at it and said today, the Patriots are, I'm splitting time with Drew Henson. I'm, I'm, I might be taken by the the NFL or the Patriots in the sixth or seventh round. But Michigan, because Henson's moving on to baseball, Michigan is offering me 5 million plus to play another couple of years. What do you think Brady's going to do? Who's that Tom Brady today that says, it's not Mendoza who's going to be the first pick in the draft, but who's going to be that quarterback down the line that's pretty good, not great, that the college says to him, you know what, we'll give you $5 or $6 million a year. we like you, we want to build around you. What's that quarterback going to do, or what's that player on the borderline going to do? I'll tell you what I think he's going to do. He's going to stay in college.
I totally agree. I totally agree. Now, this year's draft is the 90th NFL draft, and most people listening by now will probably know that your father, Bert Bell, created the NFL draft, and this is the model used by all pro sports today. Upton, what do you think? What are your thoughts thinking about your father, what he's done for football, and what are your thoughts watching the draft and this huge, enormous spectacle that it's become as your father's invention?
Ironically, the draft tonight will be in Pittsburgh, where Bert Bell sold the owners on the idea that basically, if they didn't hang together, they're going to hang. If we get from the Revolutionary War, if they didn't hang together, they're going to hang separately or go out of business. By that time in 1935, when he proposed the draft, at that time, 20 or more teams had already gone out of business. The Chicago Bears, the New York Giants, and to agree, the Green Bay Packers really dominated. They had the money, they could pay the players. And in Bert Bell's case, he got the brainchild. He kept seeing teams going out of business, including his team that he founded, the Philadelphia Eagles. And then later with Art Rooney, he was co-partners with Rooney and the Steelers. He saw that the teams, were going to go out of business. And he came to a conclusion. This is an interesting story that is in one of the interviews that I did for Arlington Cable Network. That in 1934-35, he got on a train and went out to the University of Minnesota to sign a running back by the name of Stanley Koska. And Koska was one of the best running backs in America. And again, there was no draft then. My father said, this guy could really help my team. So I went out, talked to him. Koska said to him, well, let me think about it for a few days. But he wouldn't sign with my father. And my father had an inkling that the Brooklyn Dodgers, yes, they had a football team called the Brooklyn Dodgers. That he was talking to the Dodgers and other teams and was just putting my father off. So my father got pissed off and left, got on the train, and coming back, he formulated the idea that for the NFL draft, that the weakest teams in inverse order would have a modern day draft. When he got back, they had meetings later on that year in Pittsburgh, and he proposed this and really basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, he said to them, I'm one of the worst teams. I'm one of the problems of the league. But if we don't do something, we're all going to be in trouble. We're all going to be out of business. In the beginning of the meetings, kind of the teams, the Hallises and people like that, and the Maras, and Green Bay, they didn't want to give up that whole thing. But then he convinced Tim Mara, who was the owner of the Giants at that time, and the father of Wellington and Jack, that this would be the best thing for the league. So what started off with a lot of people questioning it is that it passed unanimously in 1935, and then they had the first draft in 1936. That Bert Bell proposal and pushing through saved not only the NFL, but every sport afterwards adopted it. Now, what also happened over the years, in the early years, the NFL and Bert Bell was sued by everybody because he said it's illegal to force a player to play with a team that he might not want to play with. And he won every case in court. Part of the reason was that his brother, John C. Bell Jr., his father was Attorney General of Pennsylvania and second in seniority on the Walter Camp Rules Committee. But his brother, who later became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania and considered at one time a candidate for the U.S. Supreme Court, helped him defend these different cases, although the league hired different people. But they had to fight that off for years. And then after that, every league saw how successful the NFL was, and they said, particularly the NBA, because he was friendly with the Warriors owner, the original owner, Eddie Gottlieb, that they saw, either we do something or we're not going to survive. So he got that pushed through, and of course they had the first draft then in 1936 in Philadelphia at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, a hotel that his father owned, because nobody had any money. So they put all the owners up there and had the first draft. And my father, of course, had the worst team and drafted the first player, Jay Berwanger, who didn't want to play in the NFL, so he had to trade his rights to the Bears, and he never signed with the Bears. But out of that draft, which brings us back to why I always say it's a crapshoot. Out of that draft, Michael, Joe Steiderhar, Tuffy Lehmans, Wayne Milner, and Danny Fortman all went to the Hall of Fame. They didn't have anything. They just had a Street and Smith magazine or made calls out to coaches that they might own or that they might know. The fifth guy, by the way, was Bear Bryant, who I think would have been, according to everybody then, a great pro football player. And of course, Bryant ended up being the great college coach and finishing up at Alabama. But so the first draft was successful. Nobody except those three teams had any money. His father, John C. Bell Sr., who I said was on the Walter Camp Wilson Committee, said, Bert, I love you. I bailed you out 100 times, but not a nickel for the Philadelphia Eagles and not a nickel for the NFL. His father, who was a multimillionaire, would not give him any money, but said, you and your poor relatives can come and stay at the hotel for the first draft. So that's how it happened. And of course, we see what it is today. Everybody should thank Bert Bell today. Multitudes don't even know who the hell he was. But I hope someday that the NFL would consider calling it the Bert Bell draft. I hope.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening to this edition of Unvarnished Football. We're going to come to you next week. We're gonna do it perhaps even on Wednesday. We're going to do it a day early, and we're going to analyze this draft, the 90th draft in NFL history, and hopefully the 91st will be called the Bert Bell NFL Draft. I'm Michael Jackson of The Game Before the Money. Please check out thegamebeforethemoney.com. Upton Bell has uptonbell.com, and also you can look up the Upton Bell collection at the University of Massachusetts, and that's an online collection that you can peruse of great sports memorabilia, including Upton's Super Bowl ring that he
and a gold football from George Halas for the Chicago Bears of 1946 when they won the NFL championship. That's signed by Joe DiMaggio, Ted Williams. It's an incredible collection. It's UMass Amherst. Look it up. Go online with it. It's an incredible collection. People from all over the country have wanted to see it, so hopefully you'll look at it.
All right, and we'll talk to you next week. Unvarnished Football. No fluff, no filler, just football.